you for inviting us down here. I had a pleasure for you too, for a couple of you coming up to Salt Lake and coming to our meetings the last 2 weeks. It's a pleasure to be down here with a few of our members. Really, like I said, the reason why I was asked to come down here, from what I understood, was to talk about history of the Brown Berets as well as some of our revolutionary theory and our ideas. Which is one of my favorite topics, because the Brown Berets, when it comes to our ideas and our revolutionary politics, it's a very fluid thing. We see our theory as evolving as we evolve. Our ideas come from things that we learn as individuals and as a collective. And so it'll be a really good discussion, I think. I want to kind of tell you the format of what we're thinking of doing. We're not really too big into like lecture type speeches like this, so I'm gonna go through what I come to talk about and the stuff that I prepared, which is the history and some theory, and then I want to open it up and maybe have these tables become a panel table, so we can have a panel discussion where we can get questions and input, and maybe even start organizing together a little bit. So once that happens, once I finish here, I'll close it real quick, and then if we can get to these two tables and have some of the Berets jump up here too. All right, so to talk about the Brown Berets, right? We always talk about the history of the Brown Berets. The Brown Berets started in 1967, right? But the Brown Berets is really just an extension of a radical feeling and a radical sentiment that's been in people of color since the beginning of our colonization and the beginning of slavery. So it's not really something that just came out of nowhere. I think the United States, the system of the United States and the education system has done a really good job at separating us from our historical radical past. Right? We don't really ever hear much about the radicals in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s unless you're already studying that. So when that happens, you kind of tend to think that the Brown Berets and the Black Panthers and Malcolm X all kind of came out of nowhere and just a bunch of crazy ass brown people that were pissed off, right? The truth is that the United States has been a very strong radical leftist movement in history, starting from way before the IWW, the socialist parties that were big in the turn of the century, in the 1900s. And in the Americas as well too, right? Our ancestors, the ancestors of the Latino people, the indigenous people on this continent, were very, they had a real strong history of resistance when it came to fighting against colonization, and so that to us is the beginning of the Brown Berets. The beginning of the Brown Berets is the first time that us as a people, and not just Latinos, but Pacific Islanders and blacks, and all types of oppressed people. So it's the first moment that somebody spoke up and said, enough is enough. But still, going into the historical aspects of the organization that came to express that sentiment in the 1960s, the Brown Berets started in 1967 in East Los Angeles, California, out of a bunch of young radicals, Chicanas that were in that area. And they started out of a bunch of other organizations, young Chicano organizations, and they got together and saw the example, basically the example set by the Black Panthers in Oakland. And that was basically an idea of self-empowerment, of self-determination, something that was really strong, something that was really starting to catch fire in the community. The reason being is that if you think historically, the civil rights movement started in the 1950s. The Brown Berets and the Black Panthers came at the end of the civil rights movement, right? At the end of already a decade or two of continual struggle for civil rights. Civil rights legislation had already been passed. Schools had already been desegregated officially, all right? So in 1967, that's the year, that year, you started seeing what really was up in this country. You have a country that said that they were done with Jim Crow laws, but you had the exact same people living in the same exact conditions. And even though you could drink out of a white man's drinking fountain, that doesn't mean that you have the same rights as a white person. And these organizations came out of that realization, right? They came out of something that Malcolm had been saying from beforehand, which is that this country is a racist country. It's a country that needs to be fought from deeper than just the civil rights level. This was a human rights struggle. The United States had failed to provide human rights to the people. So the Brown Berets, said, like I said, ya basta, enough is enough. One of the biggest things that sparked the Brown Berets to become a lot more well-known and become a lot more known outside of Los Angeles was the walkouts that happened in East Los Angeles with a whole bunch of high school students. 5 East Los Angeles high schools were involved in these walkouts. And they were called the Blowups, that's the name of them. And there's a movie called Walkout, if anyone has seen it, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a really good movie. Basically, the high school students were fighting for better living conditions, better education conditions, better schools, better textbooks, things like that. And they were being completely ignored to the point where they decided that the only way for them to express what they wanted, for them to get what they wanted, was to blow out and walk out of the schools. And they organized that themselves, and the Brown Berets were there to help support. The police, met them with aggression and beat the crap out of a bunch of young kids, a bunch of high school students. Which, if you know that the history of the experience of people of color in this country is not outside the norm. For police officers and for the normal society, a young brown or black person is never seen as a child. They're seen as threats. And so understanding this, it created a real strong sense of militancy. And so when the Brown Berets did what people had already been doing in this country, which is to pick up arms and declare the right for self-defense, they became targets. They became strong targets by the government, by the police departments, and by the status quo in general. Like the Panthers, they were subject to a bunch of heavy infiltration and things like that. But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about their program and what the Berets stood for back then. The Berets, less so than the Black Panthers, I think were involved with a lot of international politics, but I don't think that their thought was as well thought out when it comes to a more like anti-capitalist, Maoist-Leninist kind of ideology that the Panthers had, that Huey Newton had himself. The Brown Berets were more basically on a nationalist level, directly fighting for brown rights and brown power. And they coupled that with a lot of real good community-based programming to instill pride in the community and self-determination. And given that, whenever an organization is based on cultural pride or based on nationalism in that kind of way, it becomes very susceptible to infiltration. It becomes very susceptible to people's egotism and politics like that. So the police really did heavily infiltrate and move to destroy these organizations, which were threats, not so much because of the fact that they believed in armed self-defense. That really wasn't the reason why the Brown Berets and the Black Panthers brought fear to the community, brought fear to the United States government. The reason was that these organizations started doing something that no other organizations have really started saying before. And that if we organize in our communities, if we organize ourselves, if we start running things in our own community, if we kick the police officers out and start organizing ourselves to defend our own communities, we can create a better life for ourselves. That was the true idea of self-determination. That is at the core of what we still believe in today. Another problem that, aside from heavy infiltration, there was a big problem with our movement that started becoming more and more evident in the 1970s. And so we move away from the first initial actions that the Brown Berets took, which were the walkouts, the Chicano moratoriums, the anti-Vietnam War protests, the food programs, the X-ray programs, and things like that. You started seeing more of a, due to the infiltration, and due to a lot of egotism in some of the leadership, you started seeing a little bit more radical events happening in the Brown Berets, including shootouts with police officers and things like that. Of course, whenever I say shootouts with police officers, I want to mention that every single time the Brown Berets defended themselves, it was due to police aggression. Right? They never did anything violent, they always defended themselves. But one of the big problems in the Berets back in those days was the fact that the struggle for women's rights and gender equality was not at the forefront of the movement. It was something that was kind of pushed to the side. And that led to a lot of anger inside our movement itself, to the point where it led to a split in the Brown Berets, with a lot of the female members under the leadership of Gloria Llanes broke off and created another organization called the Aguilitas. And also, there were more splits due to that infiltration that led to the creation of the Black Berets in Colorado and Arizona, and the Brown Berets in other places. By the mid-1970s, the Brown Berets were already in decline all over the community. Their high point had already passed. And many of the members were in jail, many of the members were being harassed and attacked. So in mid-1970s, I think it was 1976, the Brown Berets staged an assault on Catalina Island, which is an island right off the coast of San Diego. And the Brown Berets held that island for a few days, I think, until they finally gave it up. And they had reclaimed that land for Aslan from Mexico. After that, basically, David Sanchez, the national leader of the Brown Berets at the time, disbanded the Brown Berets. And that was officially the end of the Brown Berets at that time. A San Diego chapter, a couple chapters in San Diego continued to call themselves Brown Beret, and they didn't follow the directive of David Sanchez. And that organization was known as the Brown Berets de Aslan. It's an organization that has existed since then. So it's still been persistent and it still exists today. We can talk about them in a little bit. So after the end of the Brown Berets, it basically, any type of radical organizing like that kind of ceased. The 1980s, Reagan's time and all that, and the drugs and the increased poverty and those kind of things led to a lot of disenfranchisement in our community. And with the fall of groups like the Brown Berets and the Black Panthers, we started seeing the rise of a lot of other negative things. To the point that in 1994, in Watsonville, California, there was a shooting that led to a couple of members in our community dying. And that sparked this sense of commitment in a couple of Brown Berets, Luis Alejo and a couple of other Berets, who restarted the Brown Berets in Watsonville. And their organization, built in 1994, was different than the organization that they took the name from. In many ways, it was the same in its core definition, in its core belief in the idea of self-determination. But it was very much more about an idea of inclusiveness, internationalism, revival of indigenous and spiritual ideas, and a really strong focus on community-based organizing. Their main focus when it comes to that was to fix the community in Watsonville. They were all people from Watsonville that had grown up in Watsonville, that had seen the problems in Watsonville, California. And so they decided that they would focus on Watsonville before they would worry about having to fix the world. And that led them to create what is now called the Watsonville Autonomous Brown Beret Chapter. They've been around for a very long time. They're the chapter that helped us start our organization here. Here in Salt Lake City, when we started in 2006, there was a little, from my personal experience, having been an activist before the start of the Brown Berets, there wasn't that much when it came to radical organizing and radical politics in the Brown Berets. And when I use the term radical, I use that term very lightly. Right? I feel that the term radical is a word that is used to put people in a box, right? Which I'll talk about more about that kind of like being able to categorize yourself and talk about it. But I'm using it as a way of understanding what I mean so that everyone kind of gets what I mean, right? So by radical, I mean politics that are outside the status quo. It's politics that are revolutionary. With this lack of militancy in the community, and with bills like HR 4437, which was a national bill to criminalize all undocumented immigrants, we felt that, especially our two co-founders, Daniel and Maraway, both felt that there needed to be something different, a stronger response from the community and a way of organizing the young people in our community that had an energy to do something. And so on April 9th, that was the official day that the Brown Berets were started in 2006 here in Salt Lake City. And we had, and by we, the people that started it, had a very strong connection and dialogue with Watsonville, and learned as much as they could from them and the way that they did things, and took the idea and ran with it, And the Brown Berets became and continues to be kind of like a collection of some of the greatest radicals we find in Salt Lake City. And And so with that, since then, we maintain the same kind of focus that the Watsonville Berets talked about and the Berets back in the day talked about, which is self-determination and organizing in our own communities, and it's creating relevant, real, tangible things in the community that people can relate to open up their ears to what we have to say. You know, it's an organization that comes out of the fact that most of us that started the Brown Berets, that are still in the Brown Berets, all come from very lower class, working class, lower working class communities. They saw things that we had already seen in our communities. We knew that the police were oppressive, right? We knew that the system was messed up because we was broke as shit and our parents had always been working. Excuse my language, right? So we took those ideas, those sentiments we had already grown with, and added the theory as we studied and continued to work together and learn things from each other. And that's the theory of the Brown Berets, right? The theory of the Brown Berets is street politics, it's street-level individuals educating themselves to create a better future in their own communities, to overthrow the system that oppresses us, regardless of what that system might be. And so Watsonville left us with a real broad idea of what we have to do. And they kind of just said, all right, you're autonomous. Do whatever you want, right? This is what we can give you, but we can't tell you how to run things in Salt Lake City. We're in Watsonville, California. And with that idea, at first it's kind of tough. Like, oh damn, I got nobody supporting me. I have to do this on my own, you know. But it's a very liberating and empowering idea as well, because we now had to be the leaders that are lacking in our community. So we started creating individual programs to meet the needs of the community. And the first things that we started to do was to create dialogues between us and the community forums, community surveys, and just have open one-on-one discussion. Because even though we came from the communities and we still live in those same communities, we understand the privilege we have of having gained some sort of knowledge of liberation. So we have to continually work at keeping a solid connection with our community. And like I'm saying, when I speak of community, it's the understanding of the background of Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City isn't divided in a black area, a brown area, a white area, or anything like that. It's really, the west side is whoever's on there. So our community, and my community in Rose Park, where I live in Salt Lake City, is Latinos, Pacific Islanders, and refugees. So that's the communities we work with, right? So in order to fulfill our needs to our community, the Brown Berets naturally have to step away from a nationalist idea, which I'll get more into in a little bit. So with the understanding that Watsonville not only can't tell us what to do, but they shouldn't tell us what to do in Salt Lake City, we started doing that. And we use the theory or the idea of self-determination that Malcolm X spoke about. That's as our main theory of what it is that we want to do, right? So whatever change we want to create, so we want to create a change in the atmosphere of the schools. We believe that the only way we can do that is by engaging the community for its own defense, right? Whether it's from police, or whether it's from employers, or whether it's from gangs, or whatever issue that there is in the community they feel they have to do, the community has to be mobilized to defend its own interest. Only with that kind of awareness can the community then take that next step, that logical step, as it continues to evolve, just like we personally evolve. As the community continuously evolves to the time when they can, as Bobby Seale said, seize the time. And when they seize the time, we'll seize power, you know? And so, to us, it's that idea of self-determination, self-empowerment, community empowerment. That's our road to what we think is revolution. And that's the idea that the Panthers kind of left to us in their last couple of years when the main focus became the free breakfast program. It became the intercommunal schools, which is something that we're also working on, creating schools. And that idea, of course, is that here we talked about is the idea of intercommunalism. And I'm going to kind of just like a broad talk about intercommunalism. Intercommunalism is basically about creating focal community revolution. It's the idea that we can create an independent community inside this outside community, outside of the community that oppresses us. We can find ways of feeding ourselves. We can find ways of educating our children. And once we start doing that, that is a blow to imperialism. And it's those constant blows to imperialism from all different communities, from here, from Watsonville, from Los Angeles, from Chicago, from Nicaragua, from everywhere. Those kind of blows are the ones that will eventually start taking its toll onto capitalism until we can create a more broader national attack. So that's why our focus is on intercommunalism, on direct local politics, relevant politics that the community cares about. And so an example of that, one of the examples of that is a program that we helped start at Kearns called FACE Movement, which is an after-school program. FACE Movement happened after a shooting that occurred in Kearns that we got together with members of the Pacific Islander community and helped start that. To us, FACE Movement is a step towards the creation of educating our own communities, right? And it's a step towards self-determination, the moment that we can start educating our children on what's really true and what's really the reality of the decadent society in this country. And those kind of things, little by little, is what we try to do. We try to implement as many programs that we can like that. And also, whenever you create something that the people care about, like when we create programs that keep kids off the street and keep them safe, and the parents don't have to worry about it, that creates an automatic sense of love between us and our community itself, right? So that means that when the time comes and confrontation happens, which it will happen inevitably with what we're talking about, the community will support us. We won't be seen as outside forces trying to be agitators in the community. We're seen as people that fight for the interests of the people, you know, and they will side with us and defend our interest, which is their interest. Another important part of autonomy that we always want to bring up is that autonomy is a very indigenous idea. It's an idea that comes from the way that tribes used to relate with each other and things like that back in the times before Columbus. And basically, we stress indigenism heavily in the Brown Berets, whether it's indigenism for our Native American ancestors or for the ancestors in the Pacific Islands or the ancestors in Africa or anywhere. We believe that in order for us to really self-actualize as a people and to understand where we are as a community, wherever your background is, you have to have a deep connection with your culture and where you come from. And that's also a very spiritual idea to us. That's something we really like to bring in. And it's not a spirituality as in like, oh God, or this or that, or anything like that. It's not about religion. It's about the connection to those that came before us. It's about the connection to those with us right now, the connections that we build together as a community. And those kind of connections make it so that the politics isn't so cold, so that the revolution is about love and it's about strength and it's about working together. It's not really such a, I would say, numbers thing, or it's not really such a cold, theoretical, systemic process, you know. The revolution has to be as alive and as vibrant as the people that it's supposed to be helping. So one of our main things, of course, is the Unaku, as a symbol of our indigenism. It's part of our main symbol in the organization, which is basically, you know, the center of everything. It's a I guess we could say it's like a Mayan yin and yang, right? It's a symbol of duality, two things coming together as one, multiple things. And it's a symbol of duality, right? I think Marxists would understand me when I say duality. I mean, you know, dialectical materialism. Put it. All right. So with that, bringing up dialectical materialism, right? And I said, oh damn, this was about Marxism, huh? As a matter of fact, yes. We of the Brown Berets take from a lot of different tendencies. And the reason being is that we don't see the issues of race, class, or gender as different levels, right? So we don't see that the class struggle is the first struggle, but then inside that struggle is the race struggle and the gender struggle, right? We see all of those struggles as intersecting struggles. The reason being is that we truly have a both-and ideology, right? So we can all be oppressed in one way, as we all are, right, as workers under capitalism. But some of us are oppressors in other ways, right? As in white supremacy and brown people, right? And so, and not only that, as males, you know, and female, right? There's many varying levels of domination that we have to deal with, that we can't ignore. And that's something we always strive to bring out. In the Brown Berets, we can't say that we're only a race organization. We can't, because we cannot separate our race struggle from the class struggle. We can't separate the class struggle from the struggle for feminism and the struggle for women's rights, for gay liberation. We cannot separate race from gender, which was a big problem in our organization back in the day. So we stem from a point, from an ideological starting point of feminist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, right? So we don't like fitting ourselves into any single category. So when it comes to classism, we truly see that we need to move past capitalism as a human society. You know, in the Brown Berets, we understand the means of production are being controlled by our class enemy, which is the capitalist class. And they're the ones that decide the way that the rest of humanity lives and how the goods are distributed. We believe in an equal distribution of all the means of production so that everyone has a fair shot in this life. So that means that we do study very heavily the ideas of a bunch of different medicals, a bunch of different methods. We believe in, and we've stated before, we do believe in an independent working class political party that hopefully one day will rise. We believe in the fact that all workers, you know, every person should have a job, you know. But when it comes to those class things, like I want to start wrapping it up. But like I was saying, when it comes to class things, we also understand, and we want to make it clear whenever we speak about race, is that the problem with the class struggle hasn't been the problem of how to deal with people of color. It's been the problem of how do we get rid of white racism in the workplace? How can we start getting rid of those white supremacist ideas which are ingrained in the way that we grow? And those are ideas that won't disappear just because we start talking about, oh yeah, we want to get together and work together, right? So Eurocentricity and things like that, in the way that we work together, in the way that we speak, in the way that we live together, in the way that we view the world, has to be questioned. And start seeing the struggle for workers' rights is, how do we deal with this problem of whiteness? How do we deal with the problem of, you know, it's always, because people of color have always been, and this is my critique of everyday leftist politics, is the fact that people of color are always seen as objects or subjects to the idea, right? We're always seen as, it's like, all right, if you want to talk about brown issues, go over there, right? This is our section of the group that talks about brown issues, right? This is our section of the group that understands that better. And usually it's like one of the two only brown people in the organization. And I'm not trying to be negative, right? I'm trying to be real, right? And these are real things, that if we want to create class unity, white supremacy has to be addressed. White patriarchy and domination of people of color have to be addressed. And people of color have to start being able to be more than just objects that go against that domination. We have to be able to create, to become our own individuals, to be able to come up with our own ideas and mold the ideas that are already in place. So what I'm saying is that the struggle for race has to be seen in connection with the struggle for class liberation, not as a subcategory, which has been one of my deepest critiques. And I've been through the leftist circles and all different types of parties and different ideas, and I always kind of sense that. And that also leads to the idea that thinkers from a Marxist perspective, that are people of color, tend to always be put as activists of color. So like one of my main examples is always Huey Newton, right? And you can have your critiques on Huey Newton, just like you could have your critiques on Fidel Castro, you could have your critiques on Mao. But why is it that when Huey Newton's talked about, he's talked about as a black militant. He's talked about as the black power movement. Huey Newton was a Marxist above all. He spoke about Marxism, he wrote about Leninism, he wrote about Maoism. And all of his writings are all his ideas of how Marxism could best work in the black community, right? In my point of view, he should be put on the echelons of somebody that's a Marxist, not as a black power speaker. This, and also a problem with it is that, well, I think I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, it's good now.
I left it at that for race. But now I want to start getting at kicking my own ass, right? Because in the so-called brown power movement of the 1960s and 70s, the biggest flaw was our sexist ideology. Was the fact that we told women in the community, and to this day, radicals on the left, male radicals, whether they're brown, white, black, or whatever, tell women, let's worry about class first, let's worry about race first, and then we can worry about the struggle for women's rights, right? Then we can think like feminists. Once me as a brown man have the rights of a white man, then we can worry about your rights as a woman, right? And that's one of the biggest flaws in leftism. We always tend to separate these struggles. To me, the issues of race, gender, and class, and to us in the Brown Berets, those three issues are all issues in patriarchy, in a way that we see the world, as a way of domination, whether it's in the power of one person over another, whether it's the power of a race over another, or the class over another. And being able to analyze that patriarchy in a dialectical way, in a materialist way, is the only way we can start having a more viable theory for us to be able to better start analyzing the world that we live in today. Patriarchy is the main enemy of our revolutionary movements. And so in order for us, in the Brown Berets, the way that we try to combat that is we always try to start our ideology from an anti-capitalist, radical, Chicano, or black feminist point of view, right? Because we've seen it, and me as a male on my own, right? And as the Brown Berets having a lot of males, you know, it's always really hard whenever you're not of another category of you know, that's discriminated against, for you to be able to see what the other people have to go through, right? Like you know, and it sounds really stupid, really, but I could walk down the street and not have to worry about no holler at them, well, maybe once or twice, right? But it's not all the time, right? And so it's something that we really have to be thinking about. This kind of conscious mentality that we have to start breaking the way that we see the world as this or that, in black and white. We have to start seeing the world as a lot of different things together. And that's the idea of the Munaku. And that's also like to me sometimes, you know, I study at the university, I try to write, I try to do things up there. But in order for me to speak up there, as a person of color, I have to start sounding different. You know, I can't talk to you in the same swagger I talk to somebody in my own community. I have to start changing the way that I speak. And that's part of the Eurocentrism I was talking about earlier. Right? In order for me to be seen as an academic, I have to speak like an academic. Right? I can't be seen as an academic from my own community, man. A street academic, man. A hood study individual. All right? And so really, in my closing remarks, what I want to say is that us in the Brown Berets and our political ideology, like I was saying, is a very fluid thing. It's something that's born out of the struggles of every individual that joins our organization. Every single person brings in something different. And every single person adds something more to what we lack already. Our organization has to be a reflection of the people that we work with. And that's what we want it to be. And that's why our ideology is fluid. And that's why our ideology is all about the different intersections and the borderlands in which all of us unite together in our common struggles. right? And that's why I want to thank you for inviting me down here and letting me speak to you on some of our ideas and ending with this idea of unity and the fact that unity has to lead to something progressive. And you know, me and Greg were talking about this earlier, right? We were talking about how right now the line of demarcation with people that we work with is on people who want to do something and people who don't. And the RSU and the Brown Berets, we like doing stuff, so let's do something together, you know? And with that, I want to say thank you once again. Thanks for inviting me, and I want to open it up to a general question and answer with all the brothers. So thank you very much.
All right.